Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I am still alive, even though some people on the internet do not want me to be. Oh my, oh my. The trolls will block out the sun. Then I should commentate in the shade. Yes, people get mad about video games. There you go. So I said I would do a video further on in the game to give you my final thoughts on the single player, and I'll get you a video for the multiplayer when it's available. It's currently locked and you can't play it because it says you have to sign in, which doesn't make any sense. It's just a bloody Steamworks game. So I don't really know what's going on there, but as I said, I would do a video later on in the game. This is well, my playtime on Steam says 5 hours. I don't know how accurate that actually is. It's about 4 to 5 hours into the game. So I've come up with a list of things that I like and things that I don't like, and that's what I will be talking about in the next 20 minutes, and then I will conclude. Okay, the first and biggest problem that I have with the game, as you've heard before, is linearity. The levels are entirely linear. They are all set on one path. There is no branching whatsoever. It is pretty much, in terms of design, a straight line from one loading screen to the next, which is not good. Now, this is indicative of an awful lot of modern shooters, unfortunately. There are some that don't do that, like, say, Crysis 2. Crysis 2 is linear in the case that you have to get from one place to another, but it doesn't necessarily dictate on how you get there. There are ways around, there are large open areas, and it's like, well, you could go this way, or you could go this way. Duke Nukem only has one way to go every time. And more often than not, it's quite contrived as well. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So, that's problematic. Now, Duke 3D did not have that problem. Anyone that believes otherwise is wrong. It's as simple as that. And I've got a display on the screen right now, which, it's an image that's been going around, and you think it might be hyperbole, but it's actually not. This is how I would describe Duke Nukem Forever at this time, and, of course, the map for 1993 is an example of something that was around in 1993, and Duke 3D had infinitely more complex level design than this game, and it's definitely something that they are lacking. It doesn't help the game at all. This leads into my second problem with the game, and probably the second most important problem with it, which is how scripted it is. And we're talking about, there are plenty of examples of rooms where the door mysteriously locks, or there's some kind of environmental contrivance preventing you from getting through until you kill all the monsters or get to a certain point where something else scripted happens which lets you out of the room. There are plenty of examples of this, and this is one right here. You have to survive for 5 minutes, killing all of these enemies, which is okay, I suppose. It kind of makes sense because a dropship's on the way to pick you up and stuff like that, so that's alright. I don't mind that too much. But there is an example later on in this video, and I'm really just using this video as a background footage for commentary rather than to demonstrate points, but handily enough, the footage that I have does demonstrate a few points. There's an area later on in this video whereby you are stuck in an area and you have to just keep shooting enemies until something contrived happens to let you pass. So, that I do not like one little bit. And this goes on and on and on into various cutscenes which can't be skipped. And I do say cutscenes, by the way, even though it doesn't have little black bars. You either don't have direct control, or you are forced to sit there listening to something until something happens to let you past. There's plenty of that. There is too much, in my honest opinion. Yes, it works for games like Half-Life, for instance, because it really adds to the atmosphere of Half-Life early on. It does not work for games like Duke. More often than not in this game, you spend time not doing what Duke is extremely good at, which is shooting. I believe I got some stick for that in my previous video. Apparently, suggesting that you should be able to shoot in a first-person shooter is unforgivable. There's a word for that. I believe it's called derp. So the scripting is extremely annoying. It holds your hand, it forces you through, and honestly, in my opinion, when developers do this excessively, it's because they refuse to allow you to have any kind of freedom, and they're like, look at this, what we just did. Like, I'm sorry. It's like a child shoving a crayon drawing in your face and saying, look at this, and while it's adorable from a child, it's not adorable from a veteran developer. The best way to showcase really cool stuff is to have people discover it for themselves, and then it's infinitely cooler. Don't rub it in their face saying, look at how cool this is. That is not a good way to develop content or to present it. Okay, so going on to the shooting. Now, there does appear to be some kind of mouse acceleration in the PC version. I have played around with the sensitivity settings and got one that I kind of like, but I can definitely tell that There is mouse acceleration there, and it's not properly optimized for PC. There may be a .ini file setting that can disable that, but it certainly doesn't make the shooting all that enjoyable. It does not feel particularly good. Speaking of the feel, most of the weapons feel pitiful, I've got to say, especially in comparison to their older counterparts. The RPG, for instance, barely feels like an RPG. You remember the RPG in Duke Nukem 3D where you could gut a room with the damn thing and accidentally blow yourself up very easily if you weren't careful? That's not really the case with this one. The chain gun cannon also lacks punch, and it feels more like a submachine gun, and indeed sounds like one, as opposed to anything else. Now, of course, you can turn around and say, well, the chain gun cannon in Duke 3D didn't sound very good either, but you can then make the excuse that that was 12 frickin' years ago, and sound design has come on leaps and bounds since then. When it comes to gunplay, it matters that the guns actually feel good, and in this case, they actually really don't. The shotgun is quite nice, I will give them credit for that, and the Enforcer rocket launcher is pretty cool as well. Admittedly, it's tricky to aim. I'm not entirely sure what it's supposed to be doing. It's like a swarm missile launcher, but it does have some fairly satisfying effects, as does the Devastator. However, those weapons, with the exception of the shotgun, are fairly few and far between, at least in the first 5 hours of the game. That leads me on to the two-weapon system. Now, the two-weapon system has had more of an impact than you can possibly imagine. Some people might say, oh, well, it's personal preference. I just like carrying two weapons around. That's not really the point. The two-weapon system has caused a number of mechanical changes and design decisions within the game that actually don't benefit it. So the first thing would be that the game supposedly got a lot of weapon variety, except you have to pick and choose what's there and available at the time. Like, well, I'd just like to use all these weapons. Well, you can't. Most of the time, the game will set you up with the weapons that you supposedly need for that section, in its opinion. So there'll be a section where there's a lot of faraway enemies. It will give you a railgun. There's a section where you are running around in a bunch of corridors. Chances are you'll have a shotgun and a Ripper, aka chain gun cannon. If you're about to fight a boss, you will always find an infinite pile of explosives, an ammo box, and either an RPG or a Devastator. Most of the time, it is the RPG, which is unfortunate because the Devastator is far more entertaining, I might add. This gets on to another problem in the fact that weapons don't have enough ammunition. The RPG only has 5 rounds total, and then you have to go and reload it. Now, of course, in Duke 3D, that was not the case. You could find tons of ammo for the RPG if you knew where to look, which is the main thing. You actually had to go scratching around for ammo, and it actually encouraged you to explore the level. In this case, that simply does not happen. The game is designed around running to infinite ammo boxes and never actually running out of ammo per se. It's just irritating. Firing off 5 rockets, or indeed 4 pipe bombs, which is the limit that you can actually carry, and then having to run back to either the ammo stockpile or the ammo box to get 5 more is tedious. It doesn't add to the game in any way. In fact, it actually detracts from the action, because once again, you're spending time not actually shooting things. Therein lies the problem with that one. And all of this weapon variety is pretty pointless when the game is basically shoving down your throat the weapon that you need to use for this section. And if you use any other weapon, then you're actually chided for doing so. And in some cases, you can't actually beat the encounter at all. Indeed, any boss. If you don't have either a turret or explosives, you can't do damage to bosses at all. None of the other weapons are remotely useful. So you will always have to throw away one of your 2 weapons in order to get an explosive weapon, unless you want to beat the boss with pipe bombs, which I would certainly not recommend doing. Generally speaking, it is not a good idea. Now, what this decision to go with 2 weapons also leads into is the fact that exploration is utterly pointless. This all ties back into the linearity of the game. Because there are only 2 weapons, and it will always make sure you have enough ammo and the weapons that you need to do this particular area, there is no point in having hidden caches or secrets anywhere. As a result, there are, as far as I can tell, after 5 hours, and trust me, I looked, any real secrets within this game at all. There are none. Duke 3D had plenty of them. Duke Nukem Forever has precisely none, as far as I can tell, at any rate. So, this ties into something else, which is the regenerating health system. Now, one of the reasons to find secrets within Duke Nukem 3D was to look for atomic health, armor, and of course portable medkits and things like that. Those were very useful items. Since this is a non-issue in Duke Nukem Forever, he doesn't use armor for some inexplicable reason. Apparently power armor is for pussies. Okay, that's cool. Well, you used plenty of armor in the other games, so what's your problem using it here? I don't know, but whatever. So, there's no point in looking for areas like that, and because it has regenerating health, finding health is pointless. Your health regenerates after a couple of seconds. So, that all ties together into making the game more linear and not reward exploration. In fact, the game often punishes you for doing just that. If you don't go down precisely the right path, you usually die. For instance, there was an area in the Duke Dome in the Hive, which you will come into about 2 hours into the game or so, and I saw an area with a burning wreck in it and thought, I'll jump down there and see if there's maybe a weapon or perhaps a holoduke or something down there. It killed me. Now, it's not a bottomless pit. It looked completely safe, but it just killed me instantly and forced me to go back to a checkpoint, which wasted more of my time. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell is the point in this? It's like, if you don't stick with the one path that they want you to go down, you will be killed. It's absolutely absurd. It comes down to lazy level design and a very thin veneer, an illusion of freedom that could be seen through by anyone with a functioning cerebellum. While on the subject of dying, there are two other things I'd like to talk about. One is the health system. The health system is unbelievably inconsistent. It never actually gives you a reasonable indication of how many hits you can take before dying. It's pretty silly. You actually get down to red health and your bar empties completely, and then inexplicably you can take a bunch more hits sometimes, but not always. Like, how much health do I have? I don't know. I have no idea. My screen's got red and pulsing, bloody screen, and all that kind of nonsense. And then I may fall over, or I may not. Who knows? It's kind of a mystery. So I don't know what the hell's going on there. And the second problem I've got is the checkpoint system. The checkpoint system is not particularly forgiving, but that's not what it's all about. It's like, oh, well, I don't mind unforgiving gameplay. For God's sake, I play Demon's Souls, and I actually unironically enjoy it. It's not just because I want to be a tough guy, it's because it's a genuinely challenging game. In the case of Duke Nukem, what you've got is no quick save feature, which means that you have frequent checkpoints, and if you end up running off the beaten track and end up dying to some random death trap or whatever, you have to replay parts of the level again. And what's worse, a lot of these checkpoints are actually before scripted events, so you have to watch them over and over and over again. Thankfully, later on in the game, this does seem to reduce, but I was still getting them 4 to 5 hours in, so I can't say that I was all that impressed by that. And the worst parts are when you have to simply sit around waiting for some NPC to finish some dumb dialogue for the umpteenth time before you get to run around, find some invisible area that triggers the scripted event after that. Of course, you can't do it before that, and more often than not, NPCs are actually standing in your way to prevent you from doing that, and then it triggers the event. God. There are times when you feel like the game is taking control away from you too many times. Like, no, you can't do that. We'll do it for you. Like, please, what is this, Nintendo Super Guide? At least that's optional. So, needless to say, this bit's going to be a little bit spoilerish, so if you care about the story, then switch off now or skip for the next minute or so. There's a section after the Duke Bowl where you are in a dropship. You got knocked unconscious after the Alien Queen fight. You end up in a dropship, strapped in. You have to listen to more than a minute, it's probably about 2 minutes of nonsense, as this random NPC talks about a bunch of stuff that you don't care about. And then the dropship eventually crashes. All the time you are strapped in and unable to do anything. Hell, you can't even get on the turret to fight off the alien fighters and dropships coming at you. And that comes on to another point. Too many goddamn turret sections. Turret sections are, generally speaking, boring as hell. They're usually a ridiculous time filler, and more often than not, they actually involve fighting things you could easily fight with actual weapons. In fact, pretty much all the time they do. So, sometimes you actually have the option of sitting in a turret, but most of the time you are crammed into some kind of confined space. As soon as you get on the turret, it triggers a scripted event, and you can't leave until everything's dead. And more often than not, some of these turret sections go on for 5+ minutes, and they're not interesting. It's firing a static gun with a limited arc of fire that has a heat-up mechanic, and that's it. That is boring. I could fight these guys on foot if only your level design would allow me to do so. And yeah, I do not like that one little bit. So there's a few other things I want to talk about that are bad, but I'd like to give you some things that are good about this game before I finish off. So, some of the puzzles are actually pretty good. There's a scene with a wrecking ball, for instance, that I enjoyed quite a lot. That was alright. And what I like about it is the game isn't actually afraid to give you an interface for a puzzle, as opposed to go press a bunch of buttons. They'll happily do that. There's a scene very early on with the Duke Nukem statue in the casino, and you have to use that statue to get up to the top floor to continue. And you have a fairly complex interface which allows you to move about 5 different things and also activate an explosion, which will make sense when you get it, trust me. And that was actually pretty neat. It's like, they are willing to give you an interface to do this puzzle with. They're willing to design this around having an interface. That's kind of cool. I like that an awful lot, and it's much more enjoyable than some of the fairly boring barrel-based physics puzzles. So that's alright. The game's also not afraid to put variety into things, and it does have several sections where you're just walking around collecting items and talking to people. Some people might not like that. Personally, I don't. But that's a subjective concern, and I can objectively say the game does have some variety. I just don't agree with the direction they've gone with it. So there's driving sections as well, as you've seen, and there are turret sections, but I don't enjoy those sections, really. I mean, the driving sections, for instance, are fairly bad. The handling on the vehicle is pretty awful, which is to be expected from a Gearbox game. They've never got vehicle handling right. But at least there is variety there, and you can objectively say that. You can subjectively say that I don't like it, but yes, there is variety within the game's levels in terms of what you're asked to do. The game also does feature some fairly cute minigames, and the pinball game is actually pretty fun. It's cool that they've put that sort of stuff in there, since it was, of course, in Duke 3D, and the pinball game is pretty functional, honestly. I enjoyed it an awful lot. There are some other minigames that are pretty terrible, like the air hockey. Yes, there was an air hockey game, and that doesn't handle very well with the mouse at all. It's not particularly well designed, but you'll have some fun certainly playing that, and there are a couple of other games that you can play which are pretty enjoyable. So I'm alright with that being there, certainly, and it does mix things up just a little bit. So, as you saw in the first video that I put out, the first 45 minutes, there's also a thing with the maximum health, whereby you can use various objects within the world in order to increase your ego. And it can be all sorts of things. The main problem with that, as cool as it is, and I really like the mechanic, is that it's really inconsistent. So sometimes you'll think that you can actually get a ego boost from doing something, and in reality you can't. So an example I would like to give from what I saw was if you use the big weights in the first gym area and you stack them up with all three of the weights so that it's heavy enough for him to care about, you get an ego boost. And then there's an area later on where you can do the same thing. However, if you use the small weight in the first area, you get an ego boost, but if you use it in the second area, you don't. I don't really know why that is. That inconsistency means that you end up picking up pretty much everything and mucking about with it to see if it gives you a bonus, and sometimes it doesn't. In fact, more often than not, it doesn't, so it's pretty much a waste of time. Now, I don't really class these as secrets, because for the vast majority of the time they are in plain sight, and if they're not, they'll probably just be hidden around a corner. For instance, an example, for the second gym area you come to, the additional weights are just hidden around the corner about 2 feet away. So it's not like you really have to go scratching around for those, so I wouldn't count them as secrets. But nonetheless, I like the mechanic. I just wish the mechanic was more consistent and made more sense, and perhaps they could have gone a little bit further with it, but, well, they didn't. To follow that up, I like the fact that that mechanic was designed around the persona of Duke Nukem, and it makes sense. And there is a lot of other stuff about Duke Nukem's persona which is in the game, which I do like an awful lot. There's plenty of amusing references, and the game isn't afraid to be really indulgent in the persona of Duke Nukem. It's unfortunate that it didn't really indulge in its past in the way that the game was actually designed. But there are plenty of amusing moments that are incredibly over the top and really can only happen in a Duke game. For instance, the statue. You have to climb up yourself in order to get to the next part, which is kind of neat. And also, there's a level which I really liked, probably my favorite level up to this point, which is in Duke Burger, where you are shrunk. And you're trying to save a woman who's stuck in the middle of a pool of electrified water, and you are platforming across shelves and shooting through jars of mayonnaise called Duke sauce, which gets all over your face. And actually doing battle with people there, doing platforming over burgers so that you don't stand on the hot pans, which will kill you, avoiding mousetraps, or indeed using mousetraps to kill rats, so you can kind of use them like landmines. Can't pick them up, but if you get attacked by rats or smaller creatures and they run over the mousetraps, they'll actually die, so that is pretty awesome. I like that an awful lot. That's probably been my favorite level. Admittedly, if they do use that gimmick too much more, I will get sick of it, because this is about the third time where I've had to use the shrinking mechanic. That pretty much wraps up the things I liked about it, honestly, and there are a few minor gripes with it that I would like to point out. Firstly, the fact that the beer power-up, which you can drink in order to give yourself extra toughness for a short period of time, makes the game now unplayable. Now, for one, Duke gets drunk after one beer, apparently. That's fairly surprising. He's a bit of a lightweight in his old age, but that's not really the problem. The real problem is that it blurs up the screen like hell, and even turning off motion blur doesn't make that go away. Now, that's made infinitely worse on any level where you have to use Duke Vision because it's too dark to actually see. Duke Vision, which is the night vision, in combination with the use of the beer, which gives the blur effect, makes things impossible to see. It is horrendous, and I don't know what the hell they were thinking in designing that. On another point, the fact is that the game is slow, and I do mean really, really slow. And this is indicative of modern shooters, sadly. I wish that it wasn't, but it is. Even Crysis 2 falls into this trap. Crysis had a speed mode. Crysis 2 doesn't. It has a sprint, which is kind of a mild hobble. I'd also like to point out that Duke gets tired after running for about 10 seconds, but he's getting old. What can I say? He's getting on in years. He's going to have to retire to a home shortly, by the looks of it. Kind of sad. But yeah, the game is really slow. The jumping height is incredibly low, so you really can't do any cool stuff. You can't just jump around attacking enemies. It serves no practical purpose. In fact, it's a very, very bad idea. So it's just a case of hide behind cover, shoot. Hide behind more cover, shoot. It's not fun, honestly. And more often than not, you actually can't dodge projectiles in the same way that you can dodge them in Duke 3D. So it does make sense to take cover a lot of the time. And of course, that's tied in with the health mechanic. You have to take cover in order to regenerate your health. And while, yes, you can do execution moves, which will refill your ego meter, those execution moves seem to be very unreliable as to when they actually happen. It's a neat mechanic, but I feel that it could have been put into the game in a more direct way as opposed to something that's optional. It's like the game put it in there, it's like, well, you could do this, but really you should be regenerating health behind that concrete block, so you better go there. Which is kind of unfortunate. I think if they'd based the game more around that kind of mechanic, it would have been more enjoyable and, of course, faster paced as a direct result of that. Speaking of the pacing, there is an awful lot of time where you are not shooting anything, and I'm not just talking about driving or doing these other weird sections, I'm actually talking about going through the levels and not encountering enemies for minutes at a time, which is fairly stupid, honestly. There's quite a bit of platforming involved in it. Admittedly, Duke 3D had that as well, but usually it wasn't to the detriment of the actual first-person shooter part of the game. In this case, it most certainly is. There's a lot of bits where you're just like, jump, 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 okay, find my way around here, duck here, oh, is there an object anywhere? And you haven't seen an enemy for ages, which is pretty damn ridiculous, honestly. Speaking of the pacing, once again, the addition of NPCs actually serves to slow the game down, and I don't like that. It seems like they're trying to extend the longevity of the game by padding it out, and I'm not a fan of that. I'm certainly not a fan of it in modern shooters either. I would just like well-designed levels and actual content as opposed to sitting there listening to voice acting, which for the most part is not particularly great anyway. I could talk a little bit about the graphics, even though they don't matter all that much. Bear in mind, this is a remastered game that was started 12 damn years ago. We didn't expect it to look all that great, and as a direct result, it doesn't. But the art design is actually what disappoints me an awful lot. I had people saying, oh, I'm really looking forward to Duke. Finally, we'll have a game where it's not all browns. No, actually, the game is very, very brown. Incredibly brown. The city is brown, the desert is brown, the inside of the hive is sort of greeny, slimy brown. It's not a very colourful game, honestly, and it could be way more colourful than it is, so it really has fallen into the trap, honestly. If you want a colourful game that is this style, you go play Bulletstorm. That is an incredibly colourful game. It's a very beautiful game, in my opinion, as well. It's very bombastic, so if you're going to play something that's so on rails and scripted and linear, please go play Bulletstorm, because as I said, it's just a better game. I'd also like to point out a minor gripe in that the game, for the most part, doesn't actually have an awful lot of music. Now, maybe, once again, this is an old-school thing, but the game's too quiet. Like, all the time. It's like, oh, I'm going to do some platforming, blah, 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 for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, all you hear is the wind. And and maybe the occasional one-liner if you see something cool, and that's it. I'm disappointed by that. The actual quality of the music in general isn't very good either. There is one very, very cool moment where you are in a dropship, as you probably saw earlier in the video, because that's what we were doing right there, where you have a guitar version of Ride of the Valkyries going on. That's neat, but unfortunately the game definitely lacks that musical punch that the previous games have had, even if it was particularly lo-fi. It's like saying, oh, well, the music here is better because it's not lo-fi. I'm sorry, but the Doom soundtrack is one of the best game soundtracks ever made, and that's lo-fi as all hell. So don't give me that. I also cite as my example Warcraft 2, which is how freaking old now? Yeah. Now, I'd love to show you the multiplayer, but as I said before, on launch it is not available on PC. It's currently saying, you must sign in. It's like, sign in to what? I'm playing it through Steam, and it's a Steamworks game. What more do I need to do? So I assume that they've kept the multiplayer locked down or something, maybe until the US launch, which is extremely disappointing. So, a conclusion, folks. That is pretty much all of my rationale and reasoning for not liking this game out on the table. Feel free to disagree with it if you so desire, but I have a feeling if you play the game, then you will see my points. And of course, some of that is subjective, but some of it is factual. And it's impossible to have a purely objective opinion of media. I'm never objective. I try and present a point and say, well, this is the factual point, and this is what I think of it, but some people might actually like that. I mean, how do you argue with someone like that? Well, I like Duke Nukem Forever. Okay. How do I argue with that? You can't. But for all of those reasons that I've just given in the last 25 minutes, as well as the rationale given in the last 2 big videos, the 45-minute previews, I have to say that Duke Nukem Forever is by far one of the dullest shooters I've played in a very long time. It is subpar in pretty much every possible respect. Did anyone really expect anything more of it? I certainly hope not. I held out hope that it would be old school, but really what it is it's got all of the bad things about old school shooters, but all of the bad things about new school modern shooters as well. Which is a horrible mix. It really, really is. It is a dud. It is pretty much a failure, and for the most part, it is an example and indeed a demonstration of everything that is wrong with single-player FPS in 2011. All I can say is I hope that this is a gigantic freaking wake-up call to, 1, gamers, and 2, developers, that this kind of nonsense is not good enough anymore. It really, really is not. Can we please move out of this era of FPS into something a little bit more imaginative? And people keep asking me, why is it you think that people don't care about single player anymore and only buy an FPS for the multiplayer? My answer is, just look at Duke Nukem Forever. This is why. Because this is the quality of the single player experience you get. It is a waste of your time because it is not that fun. That is why people play the multiplayer. It's the same reason I own Black Ops and haven't touched the single player, because the Black Ops single player falls into many of the same traps as Duke Forever does. I just hoped for more from Duke Nukem. Or more to the point, I just hoped it would be more like the older Duke Nukem. Perhaps that's impossible in this day and age, but I really don't feel that it is. I think the only thing stopping people from developing a shooter like that is this nebulous idea that that is old and we've moved beyond that, when in reality, it's become abundantly clear that all we've done is regressed. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I will show you one more Duke Nukem Forever video with the multiplayer when it is available, but for the time being, if I were to give a conclusion on this, bearing in mind I'm not a reviewer, this is an impression of the first 5 hours, I would say avoid at this price tag. I really, really would. Maybe if it gets really, really cheap someday, it might be worth picking up. There are a couple of enjoyable moments in the game, and hey, maybe the multiplayer redeems it somewhat. But at full price, no. This game does not deserve full price, without question. I'll see you next time.
Motherfucker. Dance.